Hey everybody, it's me, Rainn Wilson. I'm host of the Baha'i Blogcast on Baha'iBlog.net, the great Baha'i blog. And recently I've been doing a number of conversations with the great Baha'i thinker and writer and speaker, Tom Price. And since it is Rizvan, happy Rizvan everybody, I thought that I would have a little conversation with Tom about the holy day of Rizvan and its meaning and significance. For those who don't know, Rizvan is called the king of all festivals. It is the most sacred of all the Baha'i holidays. It is where Baha'u'llah, the prophet founder of the Baha'i Faith, revealed himself to be a manifestation of God, a new prophet of God for this day and age. Many other things happened during these 12 days. I won't get into that right now, but needless to say, Tom Price had a great perspective, a lot of very interesting stories, and I'm really excited to share with you our conversation we had via Skype. It's a little choppy, him in Australia and me in Los Angeles, about the special meaning and significance of Rizvan. So I hope you enjoy our discussion. Tom Price, how are you doing?
Hi, Rainn. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks so much for getting on the horn with me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. You're in Los Angeles, right?
I am, and you are in Australia?
Beautiful, sunny South Australia. Absolutely.
And everything's going okay in the midst of this quarantine, Rizvan, right now?
Absolutely. We're Adelaide is actually doing a little better than many parts of the world. We have fewer and fewer cases. I think they said we had no new cases recently, so I'm happy. And social distancing is not a problem for me because, I've been socially distancing even when there wasn't Corona, so I'm fine.
Us nerds have been social distancing since junior high school lunch break.
Exactly.
Well, thanks for talking with me today. I'm a huge fan of your talks, as people know, and you speak really eloquently about the Baha'i Faith, spiritual themes, but also about science and psychology and sociology. I love the stories that you tell. And right now, we're kind of smack dab in the middle of the most holy festival in the Baha'i Faith, the Festival of Ridvan, the king of festivals. And I just thought it would be interesting to have a conversation with you about it. So when I say to you, Rizvan, what comes to mind?
Well, to me, Rizvan, the subject of Rizvan, the true meaning of Rizvan, is probably the most mysterious, most mystical, most magical concept, perhaps in the entire Baha'i Faith, in my opinion. And I love talking about it. Of course, yes, we know that Rizvan can be looked at from a historical perspective. And we can also look at Rizvan from what Baha'u'llah said about it, what Abdu'l-Baha said about it, what Shoghi Effendi said about it. We can also look at the history of it as well, because it's also an historical event. It happened 157 years ago to this day. It was a 12-day period in which Baha'u'llah was under banishment from Baghdad. He was on his way to Constantinople, and for 12 days, he stayed in a garden just across the Tigris River from Baghdad for 12 days, in which he announced his mission. And of course, we know lots of history about what happened to Rizvan. When I say a lot, we know some history. And we also know what Baha'u'llah said about it. Of course, we have holy days in the Baha'i Faith. We also have the holiest days, which are the Rizvan festival. Shoghi Effendi referred to them as the holiest of all the festivals. Baha'u'llah called it the most great festival, the king of festivals, the festival of God, and so on. But the interesting thing is that in the accounts by Shoghi Effendi in God Passes By, he says the exact nature and details of Baha'u'llah's declaration we don't know, which in itself is kind of interesting. The most significant, the holiest thing. We don't know the exact nature and details. We just have some accounts, by Nabil and a few others of what happened. And those accounts generally figure quite dominantly in our holy day celebrations. The accounts of the tents that Baha'u'llah had and the roses that they would bring in every day. The gardener would bring in more and more roses. The roses were piled so high in the middle of the tent that when they sat on the ground and had tea, they couldn't see each other because that's how high the roses were. Mm-hmm. And of course, the nightingales, and Baha'u'llah referred to the nightingales. Baha'u'llah's departure, we often recount the history of it because the people gathered on all sides, and he had this magnificent horse. Shoghi Effendi said it was a red roan stallion, the finest that his followers could purchase for him. And he rode out in great majesty, and Baha'u'llah himself referred to the fact that he was able to depart from the Garden of Rizvan with such majesty as none can imagine. We know these historical accounts, the riding of the horse, the nightingales, the roses, and many times when we have the celebrations, we recount that history. And mm-hmm. when we go through it and we tell it, just like, Christians, they recount the history and so on. But I find that the history in itself is not really the true meaning of Rizvan. The true meaning of Rizvan, it transcends the history. And so we need to understand this. First of all, Shoghi Effendi said that although we don't know exactly what Baha'u'llah said on that first day when he made the announcement, there are accounts that Baha'u'llah made 3 announcements that day. We don't know the exact wording, but we know the 3 announcements.
And do we know which day we're talking about? Is this on the 9th day?
No, on the very first day.
Okay.
On the very first day, he has, according to reports, made 3 announcements. We don't have the exact words, but the 3 announcements were, number 1 is that he completely annulled advancing the faith through fighting or violence.
Okay.
That was annulled, and that one is pretty obvious. He said that
good
the
call.
faith is to do. Yeah, it was a good call.
Good call on his part. Yeah.
Any kind of violence or jihad or whatever that might have been believed to be permitted under Islam, he completely annulled. The second announcement he made was that there would not be another prophet from God to appear, another manifestation for a full 1,000 years or more, not for at least 1,000 years. Mm-hmm. Once again, pretty understandable. The third was the most interesting. And he said that at this moment, the moment in which he revealed this, that all the names and attributes of God were fully manifest in all created things, in everything, in all created things. He said that he had completely shed the light of his glory throughout creation. He infused creation at that very moment. In fact, there's many tablets that Baha'u'llah wrote about Rizvan, some that were revealed right in the garden that he gave to people, and some that came later. And he referred to Rizvan as the day of supreme felicity. Let me read this. He says, "Rejoice with exceeding gladness, O people of Baha, as ye call to remembrance the day of supreme felicity, the day whereon the tongue of the Ancient of Days has spoken, as he departed from his house, proceeded to the spot from which he shed upon the whole creation the splendors of his name." So he says, that spot, he shed upon the whole creation the splendors of his name. So Rizvan is not a local event in which something was said and received by a handful of people or a number of people in one local spot. It was a worldwide event in which Baha'u'llah did something to the entire world. He continues, I'm reading from the same tablet, "Were we to reveal the hidden secret of that day, all they that dwell on earth and in heavens would swoon away and die." Now, it's hard to imagine something that I could tell you that would make you swoon away and die. I mean, how what could I tell you that would make you swoon away and die? And yet,
I got one thing. Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie are getting back together again.
Yes, it's almost as powerful as that.
Almost.
Okay, so if you were...
Yep.
Yes, exactly. He says, if he were to reveal the hidden secret. And so somehow we have to understand that Rizvan It's not a local event. It's a global, it's a universal event in which Baha'u'llah says that he completely regenerated the world. In one tablet about Rizvan, I don't have it with me, but I recall it quite well. He said, we caused everything to expire, and then we recreated it all again on Rizvan. And, so, Christians believe that the world began 6,000 years ago, or some believe, looking at the book of Genesis, and other people believe when the world began. It would be right to say that the world began 157 years ago in one sense, in the sense that, everything before that was another world that he caused to expire, and a new world was made into creation. And he says, yes, it was reborn. And
also worth mentioning that reborn in the springtime, like a month after Nowruz, the first day of spring, there's a renewal and rebirth symbolism that runs through the spring imagery around Rizvan as well.
Exactly. Baha'u'llah often refers to Rizvan as the divine springtime. So in other words, there's a spring that happens every year, and then there's another kind of spring which happens every 1,000 years or so, when the manifestation of God appears, when the sun rises again. I find it interesting. I was recently reading that Baha'u'llah called it the day of supreme felicity. I don't know if you've seen that tablet. Felicity, of course, means happiness. So it's the day of supreme happiness. So I was reading not too long ago that when Baha'u'llah departed, he was on this fine red-roan stallion. Shoghi Effendi said it was the finest that his lovers could purchase for him. And I read recently that the name of that horse, the luckiest horse in all of human history, was named Saudi. Okay? And, did you know that we know the name of Baha'u'llah's red-roan horse? That
I had no idea. Yeah.
No, and I was thinking, well, gee, we know all the names of Santa's reindeers, so certainly we can remember the name of Baha'u'llah's horse. In fact, there were two other horses that he had as well. He rode on Saudi, but there were two others. One was Farangi and one was Saeed. So we should actually know these horses, because I tell you, they're the luckiest horses in all of human history, as far as
we need to write a song about them.
Oh, well, yeah, exactly. But anyway, the point is that I immediately said, well, what does Saudi mean? Because I got a dictionary of Arabic names and what they mean. And Saudi means felicity. That's what it said. That was the first one, felicitatious, or felicity, happiness, felicity. And so Baha'u'llah, on the day of supreme felicity, was riding a horse named Felicity. Well, probably not a big deal, but I try to find some interesting things. I also found it interesting that for many years, Baha'is told me, or I read in various books, that we celebrate the 12 days of Rizvan, but the holy days that we take work off are the 1st, 9th, and 12th. And several Baha'i books said that, well, we celebrate the 1st because that's the first day and that's when he made the announcement. The 12th because he departed on Saudi, the horse, and the 9th because they say the family joined him on the 9th. And that's what I always thought was the reason. Then I came across this passage from Shoghi Effendi, in which he says why we celebrate the 1st, 9th, and 12th. I'm going to read that to you. He says, the reason we commemorate the 1st, 9th, and 12th days of Rizvan as holy days is because one is the first day, one is the last day, and the third one is the 9th day, which of course is associated with the number 9. All 12 days could not be holidays. Therefore, these 3 were chosen. So, in other words, all 12 are basically the festival.
It was the numbers are pretty arbitrary in that case. Just let's take off from work and school 3 separate days, 1, 9, and 12. Yeah.
Exactly, because we couldn't take them all. So the family did, of course, arrive on the 9th day, but we don't celebrate the 9th because of that. We celebrate because of the number 9 itself. If the family had come on the 10th or 11th day, we still would probably celebrate on the 9th day.
Right.
Not a big deal, but it's just interesting to think that this is a festival. I'm assuming in the future that all 12 days will have great significance, but we won't work. Obviously, we don't want to close everything and not go to work for 12 days. But so that's an interesting thing. But I want to look at this concept that Baha'u'llah says he shed on all creation the light of his glory. In another passage, he says, we have laid bare all the secrets of the universe. Okay, and things like that. There are many passages about what he did. And so basically, my understanding is that Baha'u'llah's actions in the Rizvan garden during those 12 days, they mark a mystic transformation of the world, okay, in which Baha'u'llah infused creation with the glory of God's name. So his announcement is not so much the revealing of a secret to a group of individuals, but rather it is the fundamental transformation of the entire world. It's the transformation of the relationship between God and the world. And so I got this idea strongly when I read a letter from Abdul Baha to commemorate Rizvan. And that's the fascinating thing. You can find it in the book Selections from the Writings of Abdul Baha, because someone wrote to Abdul Baha, said, we're going to celebrate Rizvan and have a meeting. Could you write a letter? And he did write a letter. And what's in that letter contains the secret. So I'm going to read you a bit of that letter, not all of it, but just tell you. So he says, O ye beloved and ye handmaids of the merciful, this is the day when the day star of truth rose over the horizon of life, and its glory spread, and its brightness shone out with such power that it clove the dense and high-piled clouds and mounted the skies of the world in all the splendor. So that's a basic statement about what happened in very beautiful poetic terms, that this is the day in which Baha'u'llah shed his light and transformed the world. Then Abdul Baha continues, and I'm expecting him to mention the nightingales and the roses and the stallion and the people. I'm expecting him to give us a little bit of history, because that's what you normally expect.
Sure.
But he continues now, and he says, hence, do ye witness a new stirring throughout all created things. See how in this day the scope of sciences and arts hath widened out, and what wondrous technical advances have been made, and to what a high degree the mind's powers have increased, and what stupendous inventions have appeared. Then he goes on for 2 more paragraphs about the scientific achievements and the increase in man's capacity to understand the world took place as a result of Rizvan. These are 2 paragraphs, actually 3, about what happened in the world. He says that hundreds of times more inventions and scientific discoveries have occurred since that day when Baha'u'llah shed onto creation than has ever happened in all of human history. And he never gets to anything else in that letter. He just wants us to meditate on what happened to the world after 1863 in terms of science. And I found that interesting, because I think that's related to Baha'u'llah's 3rd announcement, that he infused into creation something new. And it made me think of the concept, which I believe when a manifestation of God comes, there are 2 things that happen. One is the gift of revelation of God to man, and the other is the infusion of capacity into man to receive that revelation. It's a dual thing.
Yeah, a twofold process.
It's a twofold process, the gift of revelation and the infusion of capacity. And for some reason, Abdul Baha wanted to dwell on that infusion of capacity, that regeneration. Everything was made anew. And so when he said this, he said, for example, I'm reading from his Rizvan letter again. He says, take, for example, the sum total of all the books that were ever written in past ages, and compare them with the books and treatises that our era has produced. And he says they far alone exceed the total number of volumes of all that is written. In other words, more things, according to Abdul Baha, were discovered and written about just after Rizvan than everything in human history. Now, when he first said that, I thought, is that hyperbole? Is he exaggerating or whatever? So I decided to do some research into it. And I can't tell you everything right now. So I just want to focus on one interesting thing. Everybody knows that the world is dramatically different today than it was from 1863. I mean, just think about it. I remember in the mid-1980s having meetings with my grandfather, who lived to be nearly 100, and he was born in the 1880s. And he told me about his life. When they had no telephones, they had no automobiles, they had no electricity. He used to grow his own food and hunt, kill animals. And he told me about his life. And as he was telling me this, in the 1980s, I was thinking, we got airplanes and cars and telephones and all these things that we have today. Has anyone in 100-year period gone through as much as my grandfather has gone through? I was just thinking about this. And basically that's what Abdu'l-Baha was saying. So I decided to check Abdu'l-Baha's statement that post-Rizvan, the world exploded in scientific discoveries. Yeah. And gradually I realized that, of course, we had electricity in the automobile and the airplane and so on. But it all started pretty much, according to Albert Einstein, according to historians of science, it started with a particular scientist named James Clerk Maxwell. He was Scottish, and he was working in the 1860s in London. And you might know that when Einstein was once asked, do you stand on the shoulders of Newton? He said, no, I don't stand on the shoulders of Newton. I stand on the shoulders of Maxwell. And in fact, the title of the most famous book about Maxwell is The Man Who Changed Everything. The man who changed everything, okay? Actually, Baha'u'llah was the man who changed everything. But there's also a video, a beautiful documentary by BBC called James Clerk Maxwell, The Man Who Changed the World. Why is it that Einstein and scientists said that Maxwell changed the world? Well, it so happens that he basically, almost single-handedly, although using the research of others, discovered the nature of electromagnetism. He published a paper called A Dynamical Theory of Electromagnetic Fields, which is considered the most monumental, most transforming document in all of scientific history, a dynamic theory of electromagnetic field, because it led to an understanding of light and electricity and magnetism and their relationships, and the complete discovery of the electromagnetic spectrum, which led to radio and television, everything that we have today, whether it be your cell phones or your GPS or whatever. Its genesis is this paper, A Dynamical Theory of Electromagnetic Fields, written by James Clerk Maxwell. So I was fascinated that history would point to this as a turning point. So I looked up when it was published. Do you know when it was published?
I got to go with 1864.
1865.
Oh, 1865. I was off by one. Okay.
Okay, but the point is that you certainly can't publish a paper. The most significant scientific advance in all of human history, you can't publish it and have come up with it right in 1865. So one can properly assume that it was around 63 or 64 that he was coming up with it. In fact, we have a letter from him while he was working on the paper to his cousin. It's a fascinating letter in which he says he's sitting on this paper that he's about to, submit, and it's going to be great guns. He called it. That was his term, great guns. Great. So sometime between 63 and 65, when Baha'u'llah shed into the world this new regeneration, this is what happens. And so, and then immediately from 1865 on, of course, it took more than 20 years for them to verify everything that he said. But it's quite clear that Abdu'l-Baha was completely right, that the world itself suddenly had a scientific explosion, the like of which human history has never seen. And this was all due to what Baha'u'llah did in that first day of Rizvan, when he shed upon creation the splendor of his lights.
Well,
it's
interesting. Sorry to interject here. It's interesting that Darwin, Origin of Species, was right before 1863. But when you're talking about the capacity of man to receive information, it took many years for Darwin's discoveries about evolution to become kind of verified and become fact. And it wasn't until the late 1860s, 1870s that his, the Origin of Species became what it was. So.
Absolutely. And we also have to recognize that it wasn't only in science that there was such an explosion. In poetry, in music, in drama, in literature, medical fields, in almost every field from the 1860s to about, say, 1920, and then continuing on, we've seen tremendous advances that we couldn't believe. How did the human race suddenly become so smart? Suddenly I mean, let's get this right. Electricity and magnetism had been known since the earliest times, since 6,000 years. We have known about electricity and static electricity and magnet. We used magnets to travel around the world, by magnetic north and so on. We knew these things. How come it, and even what Maxwell used, it wasn't so much based on really complex equipment. It was based on mathematics and an understanding of just certain experiments that had been done by, Faraday and various other scientists. In other words, there doesn't seem to be any reason why man couldn't have discovered all of these things earlier.
Yeah.
They were all there. They were all in the world. They could be observed, but they weren't. Suddenly, everything was laid bare. Baha'u'llah says he completely laid bare the secrets of the universe. And so, as I say, it was in science that Abdu'l-Baha referred to, but it also was in poetry and in music and in drama and all kinds of other things. And of course, it is continuing still today. And we do see some parallels with the appearance of other manifestations of God. For example, there was a tremendous flourishing of science and technology and medicine following the appearance of Muhammad. We know this.
Sure.
And so we have to understand, and I'm sure that if you look at the advances in the cultures in Egypt and in Greece and so on, this came from Moses and so on. And Abdu'l-Baha refers to some of these earlier examples in Some Answer Questions. But this was a great transformation of the world. So we have to view Rizvan not just as an historical event in which there are beautiful stories of what happened with the nightingales and the roses and the horses, but we have to view it as a global event in which Baha'u'llah transmitted something to every human being on the planet, whether they were sitting in that garden or not. I love the fact that it was in a garden. I mean, this is fascinating to me in and of itself. If you think of all the ways a messenger of God could announce himself. He could go to the mountaintop. He could come down with tablets. He could go to a mosque. He could speak to multitudes, whatever, we want to imagine how it could happen. But Baha'u'llah chose a garden. And a garden it's a very beautiful thing. It has many analogies. Even human beings have compared to gardens. And Baha'u'llah loved gardens himself. This is why Abdu'l-Baha built the Rizvan garden, which is different. It's in near Akka. Because Baha'u'llah loved gardens. This is obviously why Shoghi Effendi has adorned all of the Baha'i holy places with magnificent gardens. You understand? So it's fascinating to me that it was in a garden of all places. It's fascinating to me that it took him 12 days to do it. It actually took much longer than 12 days. The 12 days was when he was there, but it was nearly a month, nearly 30 days that he was receiving visitors in his house, what he called his most great house in Baghdad. He received them just continually as he got ready for his departure. And then when he finally went to the Garden of Rizvan, he was there 12 days. And then after the 12 days, when he got on Saudi, the horse, I keep mentioning the name of the horse, he only went 3 miles up the Tigris River. He just went 3 miles up and then stayed in another garden for 7 days.
Oh, no kidding. Ready. I had no idea about that.
No, these are all little, I'm trying to find facts that people don't know. And he stayed there for 7 days because they still had to get ready, because it was a very long journey. I think it was like 2 months or something. They had to get ready, and they to pack everything up and do on. And so the point is that it was part of a longer period. I'm thinking maybe about 50 days. But the 12 days of Rizvan are very special because of that reason.
Well, I love, Tom, the metaphors of being in a garden, and there's so many writings and poetic symbolism of gardens throughout the Baha'i writings, and it's flowers and blooming and cultivation and flowers in the heart and the rose of love. And so you think about this divine springtime poetically taking place in a garden, and then specifically having to do with this flourishing of arts and sciences throughout the world in the decades following it. And that truly is the kind of universal impact of what a divine springtime is.
Exactly. We could talk just about the garden and the garden analogy and the beauty of it. So I love that Baha'u'llah, he chose a garden. And it was a garden on a river. And of course, rivers are also wonderful symbols, the water of life and so on. In fact, the Tigris River, Baha'u'llah had actually revealed earlier these hidden words while walking and pacing along the Tigris River. So we could just talk about, and of course the Tigris River, along with the Euphrates River, is what we call the cradle of civilization. It's a very special historical river.
That's what I learned in history class in junior high school. The Tigris Euphrates, where civilization started. So civilization itself was given this rebirth in the same location.
Yes. And so there's a lot of beautiful things beyond just the story. Something that excites me too is that he declared exactly one Vahed into the Baha'i calendar. I don't know if you know what a Vahed is, but it so happens that our calendar, we think in terms of years, decades, centuries, millennium, 1, 10, 100, and 1,000. But the Baha'i calendar has a different measure, and they're all 19ths. We have 19 days, which make a month. We have 19 months in a year, and we compensate with the intercalary days. We have 19 years, and they make a Vahed. 19 years makes a Vahed. And then we have 19 Vaheds, which make a Kol Shai, which, if you do the math, that's 361 years. And so
I think you're making up these words.
No. Go to look at the entire, what we call the Badi calendar, which is the calendar we use.
No, I believe you.
It's 19, 19, 19, and 19. So right now, we are in the 10th Vahed. Okay, just in case you were wondering that. We're still in the first Kol Shai, and none of us are going to make it out of the first Kol Shai unless we live to be 300 years old or something like that. But we're in the 10th Vahed, and it just so happens that the Bab, who declared in 1844, his mission lasted until Baha'u'llah declared in 1863. Shoghi Effendi said the 10 years in which Baha'u'llah had received revelation but didn't announce, the 10 years was the time of concealment. And he even refers to prophecies that say that time. So basically, Baha'u'llah gave the Bab exactly 19 years for his mission. To do the math, 44 to 63. And so the Bab got exactly one Vahed. And so then Baha'u'llah's ministry begins with a new Vahed, which is interesting itself. And so then if you think we're in the 10th Vahed, we're actually now in the 9th Vahed of Baha'u'llah's ministry today as we speak. We're in the 5th year of the 9th Vahed. Now, I know that I'm a bit of a nerd about these things, but I just find that everything aligns so beautifully. The date, the timing of it, the location of it, and the fact that Abdu'l-Baha decided to commemorate Rizvan in his letter to the believers, not about the history of it as what happened there, but about the history of what happened in the world. The transformation of the world is, in my opinion, the true meaning of Rizvan.
Oh, that's beautiful. Well, Tom, we should wrap it up now. I'm sure there's so much more to say on the topic and many more stories, and maybe we can do a part 2 of this, or maybe even next Rizvan we'll continue this conversation. But I've learned a ton just talking to you right now, things I've never heard before, and I love the perspective. It's just fantastic.
So I'd like to tell you right now, happy Rizvan.
Happy Rizvan.
Or as they say in Los Angeles, Eid Rizvan Mubarak. And I hope that, we can have some more talks about not just this one, maybe all the Baha'i holy days. They're all fascinating.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for your time, and say hello to the great continent of Australia for me.
I will. Every one of them. Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to Baha'i Blogcast. Hope you enjoyed the episode and the conversation. Check out more fun Baha'i stuff on Baha'iBlog.net. Thank you so much, and good night.